Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon in the UK. Good morning in Brazil. Today, we have the honor to receive Tatiana Prazeres, Foreign Trade Secretary at the Ministry of Development, Industry, Trade and Service of Brazil, the MEDIC. Welcome, Secretary. It is a real pleasure to have you with us at the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce in Great Britain. My name is Vera. I am the chair of the chamber. I'm also a lawyer and a partner at the law firm Vera Advogados in London. The main objective of the chamber is to foster bilateral relations and to promote Brazil here in the UK, as well as its achievements and the opportunities that our country offers to both national and international investors. It is within this context that we are very pleased to have the Secretary with us today to discuss recent global trends towards protectionism and how trade agreements can help Brazilian companies to expand their businesses. As mentioned, Tatiana Prazeres is Brazil's Foreign Trade Secretary at MEDIC, where she has been since January 2023. With over 20 years of experience in trade, she has worked in government, the private sector, international organizations, and academia in Brasilia, São Paulo, Geneva, and Beijing. Previously, she held the same position of Foreign Trade Secretary of Brazil between 2011 and 2013. Tatiana Prazeres was a senior advisor to the Director General of the World Trade Organization in Geneva between 2013 and 2018. While living in China between 2019 and 2021, she was a senior fellow at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. In 2022, she was the head director of the Department of Trade and International Relations at the Federation of Industries of São Paulo, Fiesp. A career government official, Tatiana Prazeres holds a PhD in International Relations, a master's degree in law, and degrees in both law and international relations. In 2014, she was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. Secretary, Brazil's achievements in foreign trade last year were extraordinary, despite global trends towards a greater protectionism. Chief amongst them is, of course, that of the United States, one of our most important trade partners and foreign investors, which initially taxed Brazilian products at 50% back in August 2025. As we know, thanks to negotiations undertaken by the Brazilian government, the US has excluded various products from their tariffs increase, and some Brazilian commodities now have much lower tariffs. Some, however, still remain taxed at a very high level. And we understand, for example, that semi-finished iron or steel products of Brazilian origin remain on the list of items subject to surcharges. Inevitably, of course, Brazilian exports to the US have gone down like last year, 6.6%, I understand. And the reality remains that it is still very important to try to mitigate the effect of the tariffs increase imposed by such an important trade partner of ours, the United States. On top of that, the world faces serious conflicts in Ukraine and now in the Middle East, and the price of oil, which is now the number one item in Brazil's export list, goes up and down, depending on whether we are talking peace negotiations or the continuation of the hostilities between the US and Iran. In these scenarios where businesses deal with a lot of uncertainty and geopolitical difficulties, Brazilian foreign trade has shown its resilience, and we had very positive results in our foreign trade balance with a substantial trade surplus in 2025, and I believe that 2026 is also going well. So my first question to you is how can we be and how can we have an international scenario of tensions and increased protectionism and Brazilian trade doing so well. So now, the second point that we would like to ask you is to please address the concerns that the need to diversify opportunities for Brazilian companies and how to expand the markets to which they can export. And in this respect, some opportunities have in fact appeared for Brazil and the Mercosur in the shape of trade agreements. Indeed, Mercosur, a bloc that was established in 1991 by Brazil alongside Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, which Bolivia is currently in the process of joining, has achieved an extraordinary feat, and after 25 years of negotiation, a trade agreement has been finally signed with the European Union. The new trade deal will establish one of the largest free trade zones in the world, covering more than 700 million people and representing 20% of global GDP. It also provides the European Union with new channels to diversify trade routes away from the United States and China. But not only with the European Union has Mercosur reached an agreement. On 16 of September 2025, a free trade agreement was signed between Mercosur and the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, a bloc comprising Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. The agreements will create new internationalization opportunities for Brazilian companies exporting, in addition to stimulating investments and service flow and favoring technological partnerships, amongst other developments. But maybe such opportunities that will be created by the trade agreements are not at this stage fully understood by the public. So the third point that we would like to ask you to please go over in your presentation, Secretary, is could you please give us some details on the expansion of the Mercosur network of agreements? Are there other agreements in the make whose execution we can expect soon, and with whom? And in relation to those that have been signed, have they come into force already? And how can Brazilian and international companies benefit from such a network of trade agreements that have been signed or will be signed in the future? Well, to finalize, we are, of course, most grateful for your sharing your time with us this morning in Brazil and afternoon here in the UK. And I would also like to thank Diego Bonomo and Covington and Burlington LLP for enabling this event to happen today. And now, just before I ask you, Secretary, to please start your presentation, I would like to note to our public that we will have a Q&A session today, and questions can be asked via the Teams chat box. So please feel free to send them to us. And without further ado, I would like to invite Tatiana Prazeres to please start the presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation. I'd like to express my appreciation for the opportunity. Thanks to the Brazilian Chamber in Great Britain for the invitation. Vera, it's a pleasure to be with you and all those attending this webinar. There's a lot for us to cover. So, and thanks for the questions, by the way. Vera helps framing a little bit our conversation, and it goes in the direction of the presentation that I have prepared. So if you agree, let me just start sharing my screen. Can you all see my screen? Yes? Good. So what I have proposed for today is a little bit of context. There's a lot going on in the trade scene. And then we would move to Brazil's or Mercosur expansion of trade agreements. Then we talk a little bit about EU-Mercosur agreement. And then we end with a little bit of Brazil-UK trade. So with that, let me just jump right in, talking about the international scenario, ongoing tensions, disruptions, transformation, so on and so forth. It's how can we start, right? How can we provide a little bit of a context that helps us explain how Brazil sees itself in this new trade world? I think it is important to bear in mind that we're shifting from something we knew to something that is still uncertain, to something whose characteristics are still being defined. And frankly, we don't know how far ahead we'll move into this geoeconomic order that's been a term that has been coined as indicating the future of the trade scene. But nevertheless, here we are, somewhere in between a world that was familiar to us, that had its problems, that had its advantages, but we're certainly shifting away from that and moving towards something that's still being shaped, to put it that way. I think we're moving towards something that involves more protectionism, involves increased geopolitical tensions, something that reflects the crisis of multilateralism, particularly in trade, that reflects a crisis in the governance of global trade, a world where we see more of state intervention, more of industrial policy, and a world that is certainly less certain if we have as a reference what we had before. So there we are, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unpredictability, and we're in a moment where maybe we see a little bit of the two worlds. And again, I don't want to spend too much time in here, but nevertheless, it's important for us to get to where we are. The point I was about to make is that we don't know how far we'll go in the direction of a geoeconomic order and what features it will have, but we are certainly not in the liberal order that existed until, and we can discuss until when that existed. Maybe some would point to 2008, to the financial crisis, etc. We can discuss that as well. But I just tried to capture here a little bit of the essence of what we had before and what we have in front of us. I don't know how much in front of us that economic order is, but nevertheless, differences are important to highlight here. The primary driver, maybe, of that liberal order was a restricted pursuit of efficiency, and now a lot of emphasis has been put on resilience. View of trade, and this is really important for what we're going to discuss here. Trade has been seen as a primary source of opportunity in the context of the liberal order. And now trade is being seen not only as a source of opportunity, I think that is still there, certainly for us here in Brazil, but also maybe a factor of risk, a factor of vulnerability. The pandemic had a lot to do with that. Of course, geopolitical crisis as well. But here we are, not only as a source of opportunity, but also as a source of risk. The role of the state also changes in this paradigm shift that we are going through now. So the state is being seen as an actor, as an agent that would remove barriers for private sector growth, for efficiency to happen, for businesses to flourish, so on and so forth. Now we have more state intervention. The state is being seen as a strategic actor. I just highlighted here, but this is just one feature of the new role of the state, resurgence of industrial policies, etc. And then policy objective, trade as a tool for economic development. That was the primary vector of trade. And now we see trade being used as an instrument, as a tool for national security and for geopolitical objectives. This is obviously a simplification, but it helps us a little bit with the framing of the conversation. Here, I just provide some examples of how trade has been instrumentalized. Some refer to trade being weaponized. I think it's a tool rather than a weapon. but nevertheless, it's being used as a weapon as well. Tech restrictions, punitive tariffs, so tariffs being used not only for the traditional use of tariffs, tariffs being used for non-trade objective is something that we see more often, be it for migration purposes, to address migration concerns, or to address fentanyl trafficking, or even in the case of Brazil, tariffs have been put in place against Brazil, based, for example, on Supreme Court rulings, etc. So we see trade being used for different purposes, or for purposes that in the past were not normally associated with tariffs. Then we see a lot of investment screening regulations in various countries. So there was a time when investments were seen as welcome, regardless of the origin, of the ownership structure, of the company investing in your country, of the impact on critical infrastructure, data, etc. I think that has passed. Many countries are looking at investments with different eyes. But again, we're in the middle of a transition. I think investments are obviously very welcome in most jurisdictions, but concerns associated with investments that didn't exist before are now becoming more visible. So just examples of trade policy, investment policy has changed over the past few years. I think this is an important message that I wanted to convey because I think it's relevant. Old-fashioned protectionism does not explain everything. We still have some of that, of course, and some of the concerns that motivated old-fashioned protectionism in the past are more evident now. But there are other factors that may motivate tariffs, barriers, investment barriers, etc., that are not completely or thoroughly explained by the way we used to look at protectionism. So some other elements that may not be visible today are a source of concern globally. I'm not speaking of Brazil here, just again providing a little bit of the framing, right? So, and how does Brazil see itself in this context? And this is something that I should, I think, emphasize in this context, being sitting where I sit, right, as Brazil's foreign trade secretary in this challenging context that we live in. First of all, I think Brazil sees itself as a global player. Brazil sees itself as a country that values multilateralism, that values rules-based trade, that believes in trade, in partnerships, in integration, in opportunities for technological cooperation, etc. Brazil sees itself, obviously, as a developing country and sees trade as an opportunity for development, for growth. We need to see robust growth in Brazil. We have this economic need that has to be addressed, and trade is a powerful tool in that regard. We see sustainability as a strategic asset for Brazil. Brazil is a powerhouse in terms of agribusiness, climate, energy, critical minerals, and we position ourselves in the global stage, somehow making sure that these attributes, these assets, help us benefit our society, our economy, so on and so forth. We value diversification at this point in time because the way to deal with instability, with unpredictability, is to diversify our relations, our trade relations with willing partners, with partners that do believe also in trade, in investments, that do believe in rules-based trade, that see the potential of intensifying trade relations. And of course, predictability is linked to that, right? So Brazil is a country that is not willing to take sides, that wants to preserve its options, that wants to strengthen multilateral rules, that wants to strengthen international organizations, because we believe we're better off with that than a global economy that doesn't operate on the basis of consensus, convergence, dialogue, cooperation. The fact that Brazil is relatively distant from the geopolitical tensions of our times is something that we value, and that helps us promote trade and economic relations at this point in time. Of course, we live in a complex world. Navigating these intricacies, these complexities, is something that requires careful, abilities that we value and want to strengthen and preserve. I think that's a little bit of the context, how Brazil sees itself in these challenging times, in this challenging context. But we believe that we've been able over this past 2-3 years to somehow secure, guarantee some good outcomes for the country, and for the country's trade policy, and for the country's economy, while being a good player, a good citizen in terms of strengthening multilateralism and working towards reforming international institutions. Let me move a little bit to the second part of this presentation, which refers to the expansion, the recent expansion of Mercosur's network of agreements, which is something that I've been directly involved in. So a little bit of context here. Engagement with the global economy is essential. We do believe in trade. We do believe in a well-planned, gradual, and reciprocal exposure to the Brazilian economy, to other trading partners. With that in mind, we've been able to advance and to ensure the larger expansion of Brazil's trade agreement network in its history. The agreements that are referred to, and which have been concluded since 2023, will increase the share of trade covered by preferences in Brazil by 2.5 times, from 12.4% to 31.2% of total trade flows. What am I saying here? Before this recent expansion of trade agreements, only 12% of our trade flows, exports plus imports, were covered by a trade agreement, by a preferential trade agreement. And with this expansion, this recent expansion of trade agreements, that share reaches 31%. So it's by far the most significant expansion of Brazil's trade agreements in history, and Mercosur's trade agreements, by the way, because since Brazil is part of Mercosur, we negotiate as a bloc. So what are the agreements that I'm referring to? Singapore concluded in 2023. The European Union concluded in 2024 was when the conclusion was announced. It's about 2024, so we'll talk about that in a moment. I will zoom in on that particular agreement, and after which was signed in 2025. So these agreements have all been signed. They're not in force yet, but that is about to happen. In addition to that, we've been advancing in other fronts. With the UAE, we're very close to concluding negotiations at this point in time. It's a bit uncertain, but again, we were very close to concluding that deal. And by we, I refer to Mercosur countries. Canada, negotiations have been resumed as well. A lot of talks have been happening. We have rounds coming up. So we're really looking forward to advancing these negotiations with Canada, Mercosur Canada, again, and hopefully concluding negotiations this year. With India, we are working towards the expansion of that agreement. So there is an agreement involving Mercosur and India, but that is very limited in scope. We are working with our Indian counterparts to expand the scope of that particular agreement. High-level visits have happened. Discussions about how to extend this scope are ongoing. We've held public consultations on that. We've collected inputs from the private sector. So this is a work that has been taking place as we speak. And then with Mexico, we have a Brazil-Mexico agreement. It's under the umbrella of our regional agreement, so we can have a bilateral agreement with Mexico. Again, an agreement already exists, but is limited in scope. It's deeper on the automotive sector, but not as deep in other sectors. So our effort is to expand the scope. Conversations are ongoing as well. So this is to give you an overview of the partners that we are discussing trade agreements with. The fact that we concluded this major agreement with the EU somehow released negotiating energy for Mercosur to advance in other fronts. It also increased interest from other countries to negotiate with Mercosur, because the conclusion of the negotiation with the European Union somehow showed that, yes, we are willing and we are capable of concluding major trade agreements. So here we are. We have some other talks with some countries in Asia, but these are the most structured/advanced talks that we're involved in at this point in time. So let me focus a little bit on the EU-Mercosur agreement, which is one of the largest trade agreements in the world, the largest agreement between two trading blocs. 31 countries, 720 million consumers, combined GDP of $22 trillion. And for the first time in history, our exports, here is not correct. It's our, no, sorry, this is correct. Our trade flow between Brazil and the EU reached $100 billion last year. So trade has been expanding, and we're confident that the agreement will provide an additional boost to this relation. Brazil imports, we import a lot of components, pieces, parts, intermediate goods, capital goods from the EU. So that means that the agreement with the EU will help productivity gains in Brazil, will help Brazilian economy to become even more competitive, and trade, and will promote trade with other countries other than the EU, given this gains associated with the agreement, given the gains associated with the fact that we'll have access to more advanced technology on cheaper terms, that will promote investments between the two regions, that technological cooperation, productive integration, all that is facilitated by the agreement. So Brazilian exports to the EU are something that also matters to us, and the agreement will obviously promote those exports as well. We have conducted various studies in Brazil, just providing here some data about the estimated impact of the agreement. So significant transformative potential, that is so for various reasons, but mostly what I would highlight here is the fact that this is the most significant trade agreement in the history of Mercosur. This is the most significant trade agreement for Brazil since Mercosur was created in the 90s. This is particularly important in light of this challenging international context that I referred to. The agreement is also a strategic asset for Brazil, not only, but also because of this challenging scenario that exists today. The agreement has been negotiated in a way that allows for planned, gradual, reciprocal integration, and the agreement has strong support from the private sector in Brazil, which is something that we also appreciate. The agreement shows that Mercosur can negotiate as a bloc. This always exists. The question on whether Mercosur was a partner able to conclude this large trade agreement was a question that always existed, surrounded the Mercosur negotiating history. But I think that has been left behind with the conclusion of this major agreement. We need to keep the pace, of course, but the achievements that we secured over the past 3 years somehow mark a new history for Mercosur. A little bit more on the agreement. We believe that it embodies innovative and balanced commitments, state as a driver for growth and promoter of economic resilience, so policy space preserved. Under this administration, President Lula's administration, we renegotiated some of the commitments that had been discussed before the agreement was finally concluded. But in this last phase of the negotiations, we discussed, for example, trade and sustainable development, industrial policy, government procurement, aspects that we believed needed change, and we successfully adjusted these pre-commitments that existed before. And when the agreement was finally signed, I think the two sides were happy with that. But the agreement as signed reflects our understanding about trade and sustainable development, industrial policy, which is something that is really important for Brazil and for this administration in particular. So the agreement was somehow adjusted to reflect those the needs of today's world. The agreement was concluded following the pandemic, following this intensification of geopolitical tensions, so on and so forth. And here we are with an agreement that reflects our understanding of what suits us best. And we believe this is a win-win agreement that works both for Brazil, for Mercosur countries, and for the European Union. We have some commitments and mechanisms for political cooperation. We have more commitments in terms of transparency, inclusiveness, the role of private sector, labor unions, civil society, etc. So these were all adjustments that were made over the past 3 years to ensure that our understanding was properly reflected in the commitments that were finally undertaken. Very briefly here, recent timeline. I would not go through the 25-year history of this negotiation, but just to highlight the fact that we adjusted, this reference that I've just made happened over 23, 24, and then negotiations were concluded in December 24. And then we moved to the institutional procedures that were needed for the agreement to enter into force. Let me just highlight the agreement was signed in January this year, and all Mercosur countries moved fast to secure approval in their respective congresses, and that has already happened for the 4 Mercosur countries. So agreement signed in January, and by March, we had all congresses in Mercosur countries concluded the agreement and notified, and that has been notified to our EU partners. And the EU, the Commission, has decided to resort to this provision that allows for the provisional application of the agreement. So process has been definitely concluded on our side, all for Mercosur countries, and in the context of the EU provisional application, will ensure that this agreement enters into force on May 1st, just a few days away. So we're now shifting focus from negotiation to implementation, and this is a moment where I call on you, on private sector, companies that do business, on the two sides, to look into what we have negotiated, to look into the opportunities that exist in the agreement. The effort now is to translate the opportunities into real businesses. It's time for us to make sure that the private sector is familiar with what is contained in that agreement, and that we as governments facilitate this process, ensuring that the benefits of these agreement comes into fruition. So that's what I had basically for EU Mercosur, and the question is, so where does the UK stand in this context in terms of trade relations with Brazil? I don't have, I just have a couple of slides here, but my message is we have more potential for trade growth between our two countries. There's a lot that we can do together. In 2025, we reached a record high level of imports from the UK. Exports have been expanding as well, but still we have a lot of untapped potential between our two countries. Here I'm talking goods. Of course, with the UK, it makes a lot of sense to talk services as well. But well, trade and services, of course, are intertwined. I have the slides in Portuguese, but I'm sure you can read what I have in there. Exports, Brazilian exports to the UK, $4 billion. Imports, $3.8 billion. So we have a balanced trade, an overall balanced trade, but again, there's more we can do to deepen our trade relations and expand our trade flows. And this is my final slide here, and I'll leave you with some topics, questions, etc., for reflection. But what areas of engagement can we build? So where can we focus on? What policy areas should we look into as we want to expand our trade and investment and economic flows in general? So just listed a few areas here. Regulatory agenda, we are working with the UK on that, including with the embassy here, to work on regulatory convergence, cooperation, etc. Trade facilitation is something that we can further discuss. Strategic partnerships, etc. These are areas that I've just listed here. Let me highlight sustainability and green trade. But overall, here are topics that I believe can provide a framing for our expansion of economic relations with the UK. I didn't put digital trade here, but there's potential as well, which relates to data protection, adequacy decisions, so on and so forth. I'll stop here so that we have time for a Q&A, short Q&A session. But this is in a nutshell what I wanted to convey to you. Challenging global scenario. Nevertheless, Brazil is focused at making sure that trade serves its development purpose, its potential, delivers on its development potential in a country that is still in need for economic growth and solid partnerships. I'm confident that there is a lot that we can do with the UK, with Great Britain more broadly, and we need to make sure that the challenging international context is not a barrier, but an additional incentive for us to work towards this objective. With that, I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Secretary, for this excellent presentation. And I certainly agree with you that it is now the time for businesses to translate the opportunities that are in the agreement into reality and businesses for Brazilian companies and European companies, and of course, the UK context for us. It's very important. So I have a few questions that I received here. And the first ones come from Diego Bonomo. He's a senior advisor at Covington and Burlington. And Diego asks, are there new business opportunities for Brazilian and British companies with the entry into force of the Mercosur European Union agreement? And how can the Chamber of Commerce, thank you for asking that, Diego, how can the Chamber of Commerce and Brazilian and British companies contribute to advancing the proposal for an agreement between Mercosur and the United Kingdom? So the first question actually related with, we have a trade agreement between European Union and Mercosur, but how can Brazilian and British companies benefit from that? Is that possible?
Oh, thank you very much for the question. And by the way, thank you, Diego, for making sure this conversation happens. Of course, the UK and the EU economies are deeply integrated. I don't need to spend any time commenting on that. But that in itself creates a lot of opportunities for British companies to benefit from the Mercosur EU agreement, noting as a starting point that obviously we have strong rules of origin to avoid circumvention, to avoid that a product that comes from the EU benefiting from a preference that we are granting, EU products are not products from other parts of the world. But that's the bread and butter of any trade agreement, right? While we want to avoid circumvention, the very fact that the UK and the EU economies are so interlinked, so deeply connected, that there's so much investment from the UK in the EU, etc., that create a lot of opportunities for UK businesses in the context of the EU Mercosur agreement. But for that to happen, and just referring back to your point, it's really important that
Yes.
businesses in general understand what the agreement entails, what type of commitments were undertaken in the context of the agreement. And we're trying to play a role in that regard. We're putting together a lot of materials that would somehow simplify, translate these 3,000 plus pages, 4,000 pages of a complex agreement into, what really takes for new business opportunities to happen. We're also working with the Apex Brazil, our trade promotion agency, to promote this business-to-business connections in this new context, right? So we want to make sure that the agreement's properly understood by business partners that can benefit from it, but we're also trying to approximate businesses that, may benefit from these agreements as well. The agreement, and that is not a surprise, but it's not completely understood by those who can be maybe affected by it. For example, we've been highlighting the fact that half of the products that were negotiated with the EU will become zero tariff, will become duty-free in the European Union in terms of Brazilian exports to the EU by the entry into force of the agreement, so May 1st. A lot of tariffs will be eliminated on the day the agreement enters into force. In terms of our imports from the EU, the time frame, the schedule of commitments is a bit longer. It takes a little bit longer for the elimination of duties to happen. But even so, as the agreement enters into force, you have about 14% of tariffs in Brazil being eliminated, in Mercosur being eliminated to EU imports. And that creates opportunities for companies based in Brazil to reconsider its partners, to look into new opportunities, to explore opportunities that maybe they weren't considered before. But that's just looking into tariffs, right? It's looking into goods. There are other parts of the agreements that relates to services, to investments, to regulatory cooperation, to trade and sustainable development, to technical barriers to trade, to sanitary barriers to trade. All that is part of the package and has to be properly assessed. UK businesses in Brazil can also benefit from the agreement. as in the same way that any Brazilian company, national capital company, can benefit from the agreement, they can look into their providers, their suppliers, they can look into potential clients. So yes, the EU-Mercosur agreement creates opportunities and changes the scenario in which UK businesses operate if they're interested in this, if they are affected or potentially affected by this relationship, EU-Mercosur.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that. And you just referred that there are other issues that are covered by the agreement, and you refer to. Hello? Sorry,
Yes,
I thought I heard something, but okay. So going back to the question, you refer to other topics that are referred to in the agreement, and I would like to make a question that actually comes from Simon Davis about financial services, and Simon is asking to what extent is regulatory harmonization across Mercosur member states progressing in a way that reduces friction for cross-border capital flows. What still needs to happen to give international partners the confidence to deploy long-term institutional capital?
That's a good question, and I'll be keen to have your views, private sector views on what it takes, to provide that confidence. What we are doing here in the country, and we're advancing various reforms in the country so as to provide more legal certainty, to reduce unnecessary costs to investments and trade, to provide a more predictable and friendly business environment. And I would just refer to the tax reform that was approved in Brazil and started being implemented in the country as a major progress, a success story that we have in Brazil, and hopefully will help in that direction. But honestly, it would be interesting to have your views on what it takes for that confidence to exist, and therefore for long-term institutional capital to happen. In the context of the agreement, with EU-Mercosur agreement, I refer to the fact that we have a service chapter that we refer to financial services. It's important also to refer to recent regulatory changes related in Brazil in terms of digital trade. That is something that affects all industries, including financial services, and our efforts to cooperate with other countries in that area, including on data protection. So these are topics that I would highlight.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. The next question regards sustainability, and you mentioned in your presentation that Brazil focus on diversification, predictability, development, sustainability, and that there are commitments to trade and sustainability in the European Union Mercosur agreement. And we know that the issue of sustainability was raised by the European Union to ask for environmental guarantees as a condition for the execution of the agreement, despite the fact that one of Mercosur's members, Brazil, has one of the greenest energy matrix in the world. So the question is, how was the issue of sustainable development addressed in the free trade agreement with the European Union? And the agreement recognized the green attributes of our products and have the Mercosur members preserve their rights to regulate their own environmental policies?
Thanks for the question. I was directly involved in these talks, and you're right. The issue of sustainability was something raised by the EU as an issue that they'd like to see for the commitments. And that, Vera, opened a discussion that was in the interest, I believe, of the two sides. First of all, Brazil had concerns in terms of industrial policy, as I mentioned, that we wanted to see addressed in the final agreement. And as the EU reopened talks, we felt that we were also in a position to present our priorities, these government priorities, in the context of what we wanted to be what we wanted to be a balanced outcome. So yes, this was something introduced by the EU, but helped Brazil also to advance its own interests in the final stage of the negotiation. But now talking about trade and sustainable development, at the same time, there was the initial request came from the Europeans. We believe that Mercosur was in a position to defend its green credentials, to defend its position that sustainable development is not only about environment, but it's also about economic and social dimensions. We also made sure to include in what became an appendix to one of the chapters of the agreement. So the agreement has a trade and sustainable development chapter. What we negotiated in 23, 24 was an additional set of commitments to that particular chapter, and it was a balanced set of commitments. We, for example, made sure to include in those commitments that any restriction on trade on the argument of sustainability should be based in science. So science-based was something that policies affecting trade was something that was important for us. The need for cooperation in that area was something that was relevant for us. The needs to promote green trade. So we made sure to include that within 1 year of the entry into force of the agreement, we would discuss additional openness for green trade in the two involving the two sides. We also agreed on a reference that the data of the exporting country would be taken into account in when the importing country was implementing a legislation associated with sustainability and deforestation in particular. So Brazil has a very solid record of tracking deforestation in the country. And this is a challenge that has been, deforestation has been tackled over this past 3 years in a very consistent manner. And we want to make sure that this data is being taken into consideration by an importing country that wants to somehow look into that in its imports. We are happy to recommit to Paris. So the Paris Agreement as an essential element of the agreement is something of our interest and was something that, of course, was in the EU's interest as well. So finally, the outcome was a positive one for the two sides, even though it started as a request from the Europeans. It allowed Mercosur countries to ensure that its clean energetic energy mix was appreciated. You know, in this talks, sometimes one side becomes a specialist in the challenges of the other side. So yes, sustainability involves many things: economic, social, environmental dimensions. In the environment dimension, it's not only about deforestation, it's also about your energy mix. And we're very proud in Mercosur of the fact that we have such high levels of renewables in our mix. And yes, let's talk about it. Let's have a frank conversation about what's green, about what's not green. And ultimately, we managed to find a balanced outcome on that, which is a win for the two sides, but also sends that a positive message to the world. Sends a message that we can reconcile these two agendas, that they can be mutually supportive, that is not one agenda, trade in expense of the environment or the other way around. Yes, there's room for more synergies between those two areas.
Well, excellent result. I can only say that. Congratulations on that, because of course that was a very, very important point. We have 5 minutes, and we have one question that says, what about China? And the other one that says, is Trump protectionism a blessing in disguise for Mercosur, European Union trade agreement? So maybe you can address that. We have a few minutes. China and Trump protectionism was a blessing in disguise for Mercosur EU trade agreements. These are the final questions
I think
that
I'll
we have.
skip that very final one, and I think you can have many analysts commenting on that. But just getting back to my initial framing, what we see today is this context of a lot of instability, uncertainty, and at the same time, the conclusion of major trade agreements. So at the same time that you see all this disruption, well, maybe as a consequence of that, you see more and more countries looking around for strengthening trade relations on the basis of rules and the conclusion, therefore, of new trade agreements. To what extent these things are related or connected, etc., is something for others to comment on. Yeah. With regards to China, my question back will be, what about China? What about China? Let
Yeah.
me just very briefly, in maybe 2 minutes, just say that China is a very important trading partner of Brazil. China's been the most important trading partner for many years now. Our trade with China has been expanding. We have a trade surplus with China. Differently from most countries, we do have a trade surplus with China, but we have various challenges in our trade relationship with China, both in terms of exports. We need to diversify and add value to what we sell to China. And of course, China puts a lot of competitive pressure on some of the industrial sectors in Brazil, even if many of them also depend on Chinese capital goods and intermediate products. So what we have with China is a very intense and complex relationship in terms of both exports and imports. But we have a strong dialogue and cooperation with our Chinese counterparts. And that brings me back to one of Brazil's assets in this challenging world. We want to diversify our trade relations. We want to strengthen our economic connections with the rest of the world in a way that suits our interests. It's not always easy, but yeah, here we are.
Excellent. Well, and with that, we come to the end of our webinar today, and I would like to thank you very, very much. I think that we all leave today with a far better understanding of this matter, which is, of course, a reasonably complex matter. And for me, the one perhaps the most important takeaway is let's remember to translate, as you said, what is in the agreement into opportunities for Brazilian companies, for companies dealing with Brazil, and hopefully the UK turns will come soon as well. And please count on us at the Chamber to do whatever we can to help with that. So thank you very much indeed again for your participation. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. Available to continue this conversation in the future, on a future occasion. And we count on you, on the Chamber, on other businesses association, to make sure that we make the most of the opportunities, not only of the EU-Mercosur agreement, but also look into what is that we can do with Great Britain, with the UK, so that we further advance our economic relations as well. Thank you very much.
Great. See you soon, I hope.
See you.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.